Back to court, ladies and gentlemen, after your marathon day on Friday. That was a long day. The trial this week is going to involve the incidents that led up to the death of Ryelee Manante-Powell. He was an 18-year-old man. He had a young child, just entered adulthood, and he lost his life on October 19th, 2020. We're going to show you the evidence today of what happened before his death, at the time of his death, and after his death. We're going to hear from April Zelenski. April Zelenski is the wife of Bill Zelenski. They had a residence south of town on East Road, and Bill Zelenski raised exotic animals. He had reptiles, venomous snakes, a wallaby, all different kinds of animals. April was the breadwinner in the family, and he traded and bought and sold these animals. Bill Zelenski also had a girlfriend, Tiffany Powell. April and Tiffany knew each other. They were often all together, the three of them, Bill, April, and Tiffany. So it was an unusual situation, at least as far as I'm concerned. Rather unusual situation. Bill also owned a building down on Main Street, and he had hoped to open a pet store. And so he had some of his exotic animals downtown, and then he had some in the shed on East Road. For the most part, Tiffany and her son Rowan lived at the address. There was an apartment in the building on Main Street. April lived at the residence on East Road. But sometimes April would be in town, and sometimes Tiffany would be at the East Road address. So April's going to explain to you, she was very involved in caring for the animals, and she, at least as much as she can remember now, 2.5 years later, can identify pictures of them and what their values were. Between October 14th and October 15th in 2020, April had spent the day at home on East Road, and Bill and Tiffany had spent the day at the apartment on Main Street. And when April went to care for the animals that afternoon, she found that the cages were disrupted and some of the animals were missing. Well, some of these animals are poisonous, and it was their business to raise these animals. I never asked her. I don't know if they considered them pets or just a business, but they were missing. And they were concerned not only for the safety of the animals, but the safety of whoever had the animals, and they could be hurt. So April will explain that she called the police, and because the East Road address is in the county, she had to call county officers. She called Bill first, because he was on Main Street, and asked if he had been out there and taken the animals, because she didn't know if he had just taken them to the store. And he said no, he hadn't taken the animals. After April reported it, Bill was going to go out to the East Road residence and see what was going on. And he then reported that somebody had broken into his car, or at least items were missing from his car. He reported handguns missing from his car. There was never a referral for charges on that case. I don't believe the city ever even finished investigating that case. I believe very early on, Bill Zelenski suspected Ryelee Manante-Powell and his friend as having taken the animals. You'll hear some evidence that was always a suspicion, because Ryelee was Tiffany Powell's son. Tiffany actually had 3 sons. She had Ryelee, who in 2020 was 18. She had Rowan. In 2020, he was 11, and he lived with Tiffany. And then she had Ryken, who is 11 now. So he was just 8 or 9 years old back in 2020, and he's always resided with his father. So Rowan is with Tiffany, and during this time, Rowan is a typical 11-year-old boy who's being raised around adults, and he's listening. So you're going to hear from Rowan today, and you're going to hear Rowan's perspective of what was going on and what he heard. Rowan's going to tell you that on October 19th, 2020, he heard phone calls coming in. Now, April, Bill, and Tiffany are all together at the East Road address. And they get a call. We believe Ryelee is the one who stole your stuff, stole the animals. All along, their concern was to get the animals back. Now, if you remember October of 2020, we were right in the middle of COVID. There was no vaccine available, and there are very strict rules on if you tested positive for COVID. The jail was trying to keep people out of the jail. And on the night of October 19th, the jail and Sheriff's Department staff learned that both Ryelee and his friend Ashton had warrants for their arrest. Municipal court warrants, they hadn't shown up or they hadn't paid their fines. So at some point, they were both placed under arrest. But the jail didn't want them because it was COVID. So Ashton was released right away, and Ryelee was taken to the jail, but he wasn't booked in. The municipal court in New London said, we'll just give you a new date. We don't want to put people in the jail when it could be COVID. So when we look at the map, and the Sheriff's Department is down here, Ryelee left the Sheriff's Department, and he starts walking home because he lives up here on Mill Street. Ryelee starts walking home. Right here is the triangle where it all happens. This picture shows a little better that triangle. So this is the rec center in Wapaka, and this is Van Street. At some point on October 19th, Bill became convinced that it was Ryelee and Ashton who had taken his animals. And in fact, they get a phone call from Ashton's mother, Angela. You're going to hear from Angela. We brought her from prison to talk to you today. Angela found exotic animals in her basement. She didn't know where they had come from, but she tried to find out who owned them and for somebody to get them out of there. She didn't want them in her basement. She gets on a call with Bill and April and Tiffany and says, the animals are in my basement. You need to come and get them. She had a residence on Highway 10 at the time, and she lived, that little mall with all the little old-fashioned houses. She lives right across the street from that. We've all passed that many times. She said, I'll park at the end of my driveway with the lights on so you can find my house, because she had a rural house. So at this time, April's on East Road with Rowan. She's babysitting. And Tiffany and Bill are going to find the animals. So they start out from the downtown business, and they start driving down School Street because they have to head out to Highway 10. But walking down School Street on his way home is Ryelee. So Bill and Tiffany are driving, and Rylee's walking. And when Bill and Tiffany see Ryelee walking, they turn down Van Street right in front of him. So supposedly the big concern is the animals, and we have to get the animals, and we have to make sure they're alive and they're fed and they don't hurt anybody. But they take a detour to confront Ryelee. Ryelee sees them and starts walking down Van Street. Now, Van Street is significant because right here in this house is where Tara Dalrymple lives. She is the grandmother to Rylee's son, Jackson. So Ryelee is very familiar with this house. And Bill and Tiffany are familiar with that house. They had visited that house earlier in the evening. Ryelee walks down. Bill gets out of his car. Bill and Tiffany both get out of the car. Bill has a loaded 12-gauge shotgun. Double-barreled, a short shotgun, easily maneuverable. Everybody can see that. It has a flashlight on it. He has that in one hand, and in his other hand, he has a stun gun. So he goes after Ryelee with the stun gun in one hand and the shotgun in the other. And at one point, he hands the shotgun to Tiffany Powell and says, "Here, hold this on your son." And she did. We're lucky that there was a doorbell cam, and it doesn't capture everything, but it captures enough. And because of the flashlight, you can see Tiffany Powell hold a loaded shotgun on her own son, because you can see the light on him. And Bill tried to get him with the taser. That didn't work. Rylee's 5'9", 140 pounds. Bill's 5'9", 250 pounds. He couldn't catch Ryelee with the taser. So he takes the shotgun back from Tiffany. The actual shooting is not on the camera because it's motion activated, it films 30 seconds, something has to activate it. But we know that Ryelee was unarmed, Bill had the shotgun. The next film we see from the doorbell camera, Rylee's crumpled straight down on the ground. Bill's standing there. He's calling 911. And this is what he said.
After 911, what's location emergency?
I'm on the corner of Roebourne and Van Street. I'm sorry, Van Street and Shepherd Street.
Van and Shepherd Street?
Yes.
What's going on?
Ryelee Manante-Powell was walking home. I confronted him. He attacked me and I shot him. I tried to tase him and he kept coming in. What's that?
Is he alive?
Yes, he's alive.
Where was he shot?
In the chest.
Hold on 1 second, okay?
So that was the 911 call that came in. He was walking, I confronted him, he came at me and I shot him. He nonchalantly tells the officer on the phone that Rylee's alive. But the evidence shows he never checked if Ryelee was alive. He didn't render a bit of aid to Ryelee. And neither did Tiffany Powell. They didn't try to stop the bleeding. They didn't roll him over and give him CPR. They did nothing. They just let him lay there. But he called 911 and said he had shot him. An unarmed 18-year-old boy. We're going to have the pathologist here who did the autopsy on Ryelee. And you're going to see that Ryelee was shot just about in the armpit. That the projection of the BBs, it was a number 6 shot, goes down. They enter around the second rib, tear out the bottom of his heart, and enter in a cone between the 3rd and 7th ribs. Bill and Ryelee are the same height. So we're going to ask you to picture what position was the shotgun in? What position was Ryelee in? For it to be a projection like this. And for Ryelee to fall straight down to the ground and die. The pathologist is going to tell you that he probably could have been still alive for 10 to 15 seconds based on the damage done to him. The gun was pressed so tightly against Ryelee when the trigger was pulled that you can see the bruising from the double barrels. One barrel, there's the shot and the hole that went in him, and the other barrel is a huge bruise. So this wasn't even from a distance. That gun was pressed as far as it could go into Rylee's flesh before he pulled the trigger. We have a DNA analyst coming from the crime lab who swabbed the gun. And they found Bill Zelenski's DNA in the trigger and the trigger guard. And there was some of Rylee's DNA on the foregrip and on the end because the gun was pressed so tightly against him that part of Ryelee spewed onto the gun. Tiffany Powell's going to testify. We brought her from prison too. And she's going to testify that Ryelee never touched the gun. He didn't reach for the gun. That he went at Bill with his fists. In fact, in the doorbell, ring doorbell, you'll hear Ryelee yell, "Put the gun down and fight like a man." Put the gun down and fight like a man. Now the judge is going to instruct you on intent. And what does it mean, intent to kill? And you're going to ask yourself and discuss amongst you at the end of this trial if Bill Zelenski intended to kill Ryelee. And he's going to explain that that intention can be formed in an instant. It doesn't mean that a week before he planned this. But when you press a gun hard against somebody's armpit and you pull the trigger on a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun, that's going to kill somebody, or it's practically certain to kill somebody. You're also going to hear evidence about the week when Bill was hunting for whoever took his animals. We took his phone and we downloaded his phone. He sent text messages to friends asking them to be on the lookout for the animals. To one friend he wrote, "Someone wrote their own sentence, but I have to track them down." His friend answered, "Cops ain't gonna do shit, you know that, get it done." To another friend, Bill wrote, "I think this will be solved on the streets." And to another friend, he wrote, "Someone wrote their own death sentence." Bill Zelenski hunted Ryelee Manante-Powell down. He confronted an unarmed 18-year-old over the theft of some property. He put a gun in his armpit and pulled the trigger. And Ryelee Manante is dead, and he didn't get to celebrate Father's Day yesterday. And his son doesn't have a father. At the end of the case, I'm going to ask you to review all the evidence and talk amongst yourself, and I'm going to ask you to find Bill Zelenski guilty of first-degree intentional homicide. Thank you.
Mr. Hogan, do you wish to make an opening now or do you wish to reserve?
Now, Your Honor.